Now, I've got a feeling that Game Week 31 is going to be a popular time for FPL managers to hit the wildcard button. And if you're one of those, I've got a draft for you. Now, if we're going to talk about the best players in the game to go in a wildcard draft, we have to do so looking at the fixtures that we've got coming up. So, key fixture dates and game weeks to note, I'd say Game Week 34. We've got a double game week for Liverpool, Arsenal, Bournemouth, Crystal Palace, Wolves, Everton and Sheffield United, and a blank game week for Tottenham. There could potentially be a Tottenham-Chelsea double game week in 35, although it's looking more likely that that will now fall in Game Week 36. There is a very small possibility that both of those teams could have a triple game week in Game Week 37, but I'd say Game Week 36 for both teams to double is the most likely. And then in 37, we've got a double for Chelsea, Tottenham, Man City, Brighton, Man United and Newcastle. In my mind, if you're looking to play a wild card right now, you should probably do so. If you've still got your free hit left, I would say build the wild card for Game Week 34, then make transfers to cover potentially Spurs assets for Game Week 36, and then use your free hit for Game Week 37. That's the way kind of my mind is working towards a wild card draft. If you don't have your free hit, then I don't think it makes too much difference in terms of the players to pick. But ultimately, you know, if you're picking the best wildcard team, you have to do so knowing what the fixtures are, and I just thought I'd talk through them. Okay then, on to the team itself, and goalkeepers and defenders up first. I've got David Raya, Gabriel, Bradley and Gusto as my 4 starting defenders for Game Week 31. Now, I know Gusto went off in Game Week 30 with an injury, but I've got a sneaking suspicion that that injury is not particularly serious, and I think there's every chance that he could play next week in Game Week 31. FPL Physio, who is an account, really useful account to follow on Twitter actually, they do basically an analysis of all the players that seem to pick up injuries in a game week. They slow the footage right down to try and get an idea, obviously pre-scans and checks that the clubs will do, just to get an idea of the nature of the injury. And this is what he had to say on Twitter. Now, I wouldn't draw too many conclusions from the fact he went off with an injury. I think Chelsea have to be really cautious because Gusto's their only real right player that can play right back in the squad at the moment to a decent level. I think it could well have just been cramp, like a really bad cramp. And given the fact that he was given like hydration products and some vitamin drinks or something when he was on the pitch, I think it could well be cramp. And the fact that his emotions when he went off, it didn't look like those of a player that knew he was going to be out for a long period of time. I just think it's one of those sort of bad cramps that probably means you can't continue to play to your top level, but also means you're not going to be out for weeks. So for me, I just think with the value that he provides, the potential attacking upside that he has, he's a really good option. And I'd still go for him on a wild card if it were me. He's up to 4.3 million now, but you know, given Reece James is still injured, I think he's going to play plenty of games for Chelsea for the run-in. And looking at that Sheffield United fixture in Game Week 32, you're going to want him for that, in my opinion. I've gone for double Arsenal defence in Raya and Gabriel. Now, as we all know, there aren't many clean sheets going around this season in FPL or Premier League in general, right? But Arsenal are one of the few teams that actually can keep clean sheets, which is the reason I've gone for David Raya in goal, because probably think he's the best goalkeeper going forwards. It's particularly considering obviously Arsenal double in Game Week 34. Then Gabriel is my Arsenal defender pick. I really like him. I think he's probably the best defender in the game, isn't he? Let's be honest. You know, the attacking upside that he has from set pieces, and like I said, the fact that Arsenal seem to be, well, they are the best defence in the league in terms of expected goals conceded, and they seem to be the only defence in the league that can actually get clean sheets over the line at the moment. Now, obviously, I'm recording this video before the Game Week 30 fixture against Man City. I think regardless of what happens in that game, right, that's a one-off kind of really tough game. They've got Luton, Brighton, Villa after that. Games they should all win and could potentially keep clean sheets in. So I really like the thought of doubling up on Arsenal defence. Bradley as my other defender. I must say I'm a little bit less confident in him. I'll talk about a potential backup you could have instead, purely because Trent is due back anytime soon. And yes, I do think Bradley's going to remain in the team, but given the fixture congestion that Liverpool have, I do think there's potential for Bradley to be rotated. But at 4.2 million for a Liverpool defender that I still think will start most of the games, Sheffield United in Game Week 31, a great fixture. I definitely think it's worth starting him, right? yeah, I really like him as an option. And I think he'd be good to go for Game Week 31. Dubravka as my other goalkeeper. I mean, you could pick whoever you like really to go up alongside Raya. I've just picked Dubravka because I'm pretty sure he is, other than Kelleher, who, well, Alisson coming back, I think is probably going to displace him. I think Dubravka is the cheapest goalkeeper you could probably back to start still. Richards, 3.9 million defender, obviously with Lascelles going off injured in Game Week 30. I probably want to go Richards now as that super cheap defender spot. And given the fact he's got Bournemouth in Game Week 31, you know, if either Gusto or Bradley don't start, it's not the end of the world, I don't think, if he gets subbed in. And then Branthwaite is my other defender, keeping it nice and cheap again. But I really like him because he's got a double game week in 34. And yes, they've not been winning that many games, but I do think Everton, they're not too bad defensively, so they could well keep some clean sheets going forward. So yeah, that's the starting goalkeepers in defenders I've gone for. And I've got one player that you might want that I haven't picked. And that player is Ait-Nouri of Wolves. Now, he looks to be nailed in that Wolves team for sure. And I'd say he's their most attacking and probably best defender you can pick in FPL. Wolves have a decent run of fixtures and a double game week in 34, right? They got Burnley in game week 31. You probably want to start Ait-Nouri for that one, right? And then West Ham, who are not in the best form, Nottingham Forest, who aren't the best goal-scoring team anymore, and then a double game week in 34, and Luton in 35. So, you know, 5 fixtures that aren't, well, 5 game weeks of fixtures that aren't too bad. And he's got 4 attacking returns in his last 6 starts for Wolves in all competitions. So he's definitely dangerous going forwards. And my general point about him is I think you can start him every game week for the next 5 game weeks, basically. I mean, a lot of defenders that people will be picking on a wildcard, if they're on their wildcard in 31, I think they'll be looking to rotate sort of week on week. You know, there are game weeks where you'd want to bench Gusto, start, I don't know, Ait-Nouri, something like that if you want to pick him. But Ait-Nouri is a player that you could start week on week with the fixtures that he's got. I just couldn't quite afford him with the budget I had available. I wanted to try and basically build a team with a 100 million budget to try and make it fair for everyone. So yeah, Ait-Nouri I definitely think is a player you can consider, and one you probably might be able to afford if you have a bit more budget than I did when picking this team. Alright then, and on to the midfield, and I'll admit there is definitely one glaring omission from this team, and that is Heung-min Son. I've gone for Phil Foden in his place purely because, well, I can't afford him with a 100 million budget. So if you do have enough cash to get Son in, then absolutely go for it in my opinion for Foden. But the reason I've gone for Foden, yes, I do expect some rotation in that Man City squad, but he's been an absolute stalwart in that team and probably one of their best attacking players. He's got really nice fixtures coming up. And if you remember, Tottenham actually blank in Game Week 34. I'm trying not to get too carried away by picking a full team of double Game Week players in 34 because, well, I don't think all of like Liverpool and Arsenal definitely worth tripling up on, right? In my opinion, bit of a clue as to who might be in my team coming up. But the other teams, like of Wolves, etc., yes, they've got a double game week, but is it worth going absolutely all in on? Or could you pick a good player who just has a single game week, like, for example, Phil Foden? This is kind of my mindset when picking this wildcard draft. I think the other 3 midfielders kind of pick themselves, really. Palmer, Saka and Salah are genuinely the 3 best midfielders in the game, right? Salah, when he's got a double game week in 34, and then in game week 31, he plays Sheffield United. So he's definitely, well, in my opinion, the best captain for game week 31. So it obviously makes sense to go for him. Saka and Palmer, 2 of the other best midfielders in the game. I think regardless of what happens in the Man City game, Arsenal are still a good team, are still going to be a good team going forwards in terms of scoring goals. And Saka is still going to be their talisman, right? He's their designated penalty taker, plays every game for 90 minutes. He's a really nice option. And same for Cole Palmer, right? The guy's an absolute fire for Chelsea. And when you look at the fixtures they've got coming up, Man United, Sheffield United and Everton, he could feasibly score in all 3 of those games, right? And even though he doesn't double in 34, again, he's a top quality player. And I think he could compete with some of the other double game week assets. So yeah, the midfield, I think starting midfielders kind of pick themselves. One other kind of thing to comment on though, it just depends on the general feel as to whether Foden plays in game week 31. If he doesn't, I think you could quite happily start Sarabia because he has Burnley. I think Sarabia makes sense to be your 5th midfielder with this wildcard draft. He's only 4.7 million, has a double game week in 34. He's on free kicks and penalties for Wolves at the moment without Cunha in the team. Yeah, I really like him as an option, particularly at the price. And if we do get a kind of feeling that Phil Foden isn't going to start in game week 31, well, he's got Burnley. So that's, you know, a few fixtures you'd be willing to start Sarabia over Burnley for. Over Foden for. Him playing Burnley is one of them. So, you know, if we do get a feeling that Foden's not going to play, he could quite easily come in his place. So yeah, that's the midfield. Up front, and for me, I think the front three, unless you're really constrained by budget, and I'll get onto an alternative you could do if you are, or you're really desperate to get Son in instead of Foden, I think the front three kind of picks itself. Haaland, Solanke and Darwin Núñez, I think, are the three best strikers in the game going forwards, particularly when you look at Game Week 34 in a double. Haaland, I mean, he's one of the best players in the game, right? I think I'd be nervous not to go with him with Aston Villa, Crystal Palace and Luton coming up. You know, arguably the best captain in Game Week 32 and 33 with Crystal Palace and Luton. Obviously goes head-to-head with Salah on those, but he's definitely a captaincy option, particularly in that Luton game, in my opinion. Solanke, he scored in Game Week 30, looks to be back to his top form now. I think the couple of weeks off that he had for the international break really helped him recover from that injury he'd been carrying. I think his form pretty much dropped off completely in correlation with when he picked up that niggling knee injury. He looks to be back on top form. And the thing I like about Solanke, now to start, plays every game for 90 minutes and he takes penalty, which means in any minute of any game, he could get a goal, regardless of how well Bournemouth or he is playing, right? Just merely the fact he's on penalties means he can get a goal against anyone. And then I like Darwin Núñez as well. I do, similar to Bradley, maybe Foden as well. I think quite a lot of rotation is going to happen between Game Week 30 and 31, right? Particularly with Liverpool and Man City with the sheer fixture congestion they've got. But I still think it's worth taking the risk on Darwin Núñez. Against Sheffield United, even if he plays 30, 40 minutes, right, he could be absolutely devastating against them. He's shown that this season. I think, you know, of all the games that he's not started, I think he's got 5 or 6 attacking returns off the bench, which is pretty crazy, really, when you think about it. So yeah, I really like him as an option. I'd just be scared not to have him, particularly with the double in 34. I think, you know, Salah's the best Liverpool attacking asset by far, and then I'd put Darwin Núñez in second place. So for that reason, with the double in 34 coming up, I think you want to go for him. And when you look at those fixtures, like obviously Sheffield United, like I spoke about, is a top fixture. And then they've got Man United, who conceded 31 shots against Brentford. So you'd foresee that Salah and Darwin could both score pretty well against Man United. And then they've got Crystal Palace, another good fixture. And then it's Game Week 34 and they've got a double. So with those fixtures coming up, I think Darwin Núñez is a must-have. Now, like I said, I was going to present a little bit of an alternative. If you maybe want to go for Son instead of Foden in this draft, or potentially you can't quite afford all of the players, I think one way that you can scrimp on some cost of this team, right, is by picking a 4.5 million-ish striker, right? I know Muniz is now 4.6, Semenyo at 4.5. These two guys are playing week in, week out for their respective teams and doing really well for them. And they're only the minimum price for a forward, right? Either of them are equally pickable. I'd say if you were free hitting in Game Week 34, you're probably best off going for Muniz. But if you're not, go for Semenyo. Another thing I'd say about Muniz, now Fulham, I believe the penalty taker, if you look on the internet, it all suggests that Willian takes penalties for Fulham. But with the form that Muniz has been in terms of scoring goals recently, 8 goals and 11 starts this season, right? Could he be the Fulham penalty taker going forward? And then you're looking at a 4.6 million striker who's nailed, plays 90 minutes most games, takes penalties, and is in the form that he's in. I think that's incredible value for the upside that he has. So yeah, if you want to take the risk and think he's on penalties, I think he's a really good option. And likewise, Semenyo, right? I don't think he's quite as good as Muniz in terms of attacking stats. I'd say his fixtures arguably a little bit better than Muniz is over the next 3 weeks. And then, of course, has a double in 34. I just think he's a little bit less, you know, likely to score a goal and explode in terms of attacking returns. But he's definitely still a good option, particularly when you consider that double game week in 34. So like I said, if you want to get Son in instead of Foden, or you need to save a bit of cash because you can't quite afford, you know, all the players in this team, I think striker is one way you can do that by picking one of these. Yeah, just thought I'd do a little summary of that team as a whole. As I said, I don't think there's a wild card that you can pick at the moment that doesn't have just a little bit of doubt around a few of the players, right? Like I said, Bradley and Gusto could be a little bit of a doubt. If they are, Aït-Nouri I think is a perfectly decent option to get in their place. Potentially, if you really don't fancy Gusto, I think he'll be back for Game Week 32 at least. Probably comes back for Game Week 31, I'd imagine. I do think it was just cramp that he came off with, just really bad cramp. But yeah, if you don't fancy him, definitely Aït-Nouri, just get him in his place. You know, he doubles in 34, really good from an attacking perspective. I mean, ultimately, right, there's so few clean sheets to go around in the Premier League at the moment. The way to pick a defender is by picking the ones that are most likely to get attacking returns, right? And like I said with Aït-Nouri, he's got 4 in his last 6 games in all competitions for Wolves. So yeah, there isn't really much better when it comes from attacking defenders. Like I said, you could go a bit cheaper on the forwards if you wanted to, but ultimately I think these three are probably the best in the game. Foden, alternatively, you could go for Son and save elsewhere. That's a way to play it, or maybe you already have the cash to do so. And I'd also say, on the 3.9 million defender front, I don't think Lascelles' injury is too bad either. It looked like it was a bit of a knee collision, and he simply just couldn't continue. I don't think he's done any substantial damage to his knee, so I wouldn't be surprised to see Lascelles playing 31-32, similar to Gusto. So Richards, I've gone for him purely because he's guaranteed to play. He looks fit, and he's got a double in 34. But with those Man City and Liverpool fixtures mixed in, you know, you'd really want him on your bench for those games. And if you needed him to start, you wouldn't want to rely on him, right? There's Lascelles, you know, obviously Newcastle not the best defensively, but you wouldn't be massively scared about having to start him. Whereas Richards in game week 32 and 33, you would. So that could potentially be another position where you could go a bit different, picking Lascelles instead of Richards, but I think that's much of a muchness. And likewise, Branthwaite, right? If you really needed to save some cash, you could go Branthwaite to Lascelles and bank on Lascelles playing. But I think with this team and all the context of the injuries and doubts, etc., probably a bit too risky to do that. But yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on this team. And if I was on my wildcard now, I'd pick something like this. All right, and that's the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed that one. If you did, please leave me a like rating. Let me know in the comments what you think of this wildcard draft. You know, if there are any changes you'd make, what your thoughts are on the Gusto and Lascelles injuries, two players that you might want to pick on your wildcard. Yeah, and if you enjoyed it and want to see more from me, more videos, that is, you can subscribe to the Golden Goal channel. I always point to it in this corner. And yeah, I'll see you in my next video. Thank you for watching.